having me. And yeah, like I said, I like to be able to see faces, but maybe just for logistics, and if you have questions and things like that, you could type them into the chat. Courtney could see them and relay them back to me, because I often can't see the chat once I get started. I am literally doing this on my iPhone and I wander around parts of the zoo, so it's really much easier for me if we filter all the questions through one person through the chat, and interrupt me at any time, Courtney, to ask questions when you think it's appropriate. But I love seeing faces, because otherwise I think I'm seeing blank screens and it's a bit difficult to connect with. So I want to thank you guys for joining me for what is in Sydney a beautiful 10 o'clock a.m. start. It's beautiful weather here at the moment. I'm not sure what you guys are going through at the moment, but autumn is beautiful in Sydney, and we get out of our hot weather into the nice, cooler, calmer weather. But even for us, cold weather is still, 19 degrees. So that's, and in Fahrenheit. So we are enjoying a beautiful sunny day today. Before I go any further, here at Taronga Zoo and in many parts of Australia, we acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we are working on today. So the traditional owners, you guys might know them as Australian Aboriginals, looked after the land that we're on and the animals that we're about to talk about for thousands and thousands of years before, my family, hundreds of years only, came to settle in Australia. And we love to acknowledge the fact that we're stepping on their land. We're learning from them and their culture and history from thousands of years before us. And they were really sustainable in the way they talked about animals and learnt from animals and used the land. So we like to walk in their footsteps and practice those practices as much as we can in the modern day, making ourselves all a little lighter footed on the earth. So I acknowledge I am coming to you from Camaragal country today. That's the group of people that live right on the opposite side of the harbour. If you know Sydney Harbour at all, or even the iconic picture of the Harbour Bridge and the Opera House, we're on the opposite side of the harbour. So I can see the Opera House and the Sydney Harbour Bridge from my office when I'm working, and when I wander down past the giraffes, they have the best view in Sydney. Best real estate is here at Taronga Zoo, because they look at that harbour every day. So the Camaragal people were strong and very independent, and they were a matriarchal society as opposed to the patriarchal society that lived on the Sydney Opera House side of our harbour. But they would work together as clans and use the harbour as a common travelling path and trading route. So I acknowledge Camaragal elders, past, present, future, and any Indigenous people from all over the world. All of you guys, in fact, we're all Indigenous to somewhere. So we all have heritage that we can be proud of, and certainly work together. In Australia, we're working on reconciliation. It's still a big step for us. I thought I'd start today with the most probably iconic Australian animal. Since you guys are overseas, you can't really ignore it. So Thunder's been in the background the whole time, but I'll take my tripod now and help you get a little bit closer. We have two in the area of Taronga Zoo that we're in. It's our education centre. So by training, I am a teacher and a zookeeper. I'm also a performance artist, if you can't tell. If I start bouncing around to make you feel like you're with a kangaroo, so just go with it. But that's the sort of training I have. And so with all those different experiences under my belt, my favourite part about my job is that I get to bring people and animals together to work toward a shared future. So I'll take you a little, so I'm going to turn my camera around and use my tripod to get you nice and close to Thunder, so you can have a closer and more meaningful, have a little look at him. Excuse my... And luckily he's up tall, but I've got a tall tripod. So I'm hoping you can see him. Kat, is that a clear view? Because now that he's up, my camera's up, I can't see if that's clear.
It looks good from our end.
Sorry. So koalas in Australia, and I know you guys are pre-med students. Is that all? Is that correct, Courtney? Everyone here is doing veterinary studies?
Yes, we all should be pre-vet, either biology or animal science.
Great. So you probably, everyone knows Australia for its big iconic marsupials. So Thunder is a male koala, and they're endemic to the eastern part of Australia. So you don't get them all over Australia. And you certainly, you don't get them in the desert. They need to be in leafy forested areas with lots of gum trees, because I'm sure one of the things that's necessary for their habitat. I'm sorry if the tripod's a bit wobbly. He's gone right up to his top branch, so I'm trying to get you the best view. Is that gum trees and eucalyptus species in Australia are their only diet. So they can't be fed anything else. They don't survive well, obviously, when habitat is destroyed. And you guys might remember or be cognizant of the bushfires that Australia had and suffered through in the summer of, for us, it was our summer of 2019 into 2020. We lost a lot of koala habitat on the eastern seaboard of Australia, and Taronga itself rescued 12 koalas that were in the fire front line, and they were about to be, destroyed. Their habitat was in the end destroyed by those fires. So we rescued 12 very important koalas. We looked after them while they didn't have habitat out in the wild, and they've been released since. But what we also learned about them is that genetically they were a very special and I suppose significant biodiverse group of koalas. So we've taken what we can genetically from them, especially from our males, if you know what I mean, so that we can breed some new biodiversity into the captive population of koalas in Australia. So while it was traumatic to have to go into such a disaster zone and find our koalas and rescue them, it was also quite beneficial to the science of their preservation. So we're hoping for really good outcomes and being able to inseminate some of our captive females with the male sperm that we collected while they were here with us. I'm going to move angles just for my arm and for your view and come around. So obviously in his enclosure, Thunder has lots of the iconic eucalyptus species here. And what most people don't realise is that koalas are very, very fussy. They only eat eucalyptus and they only eat 3 species. So it's a really, really tricky mix. And we can't just go into the wild and cut down all the right eucalyptus. So Taronga Zoo, being one of the largest zoos in Australia, we actually have our own eucalyptus plantations that really, really help us look after we have over 50 koalas in Taronga Zoo, and then we help manage other koala populations in other wildlife parks around the way. So you can see, even just looking at the 2 leaves we have here, we have 2 very different species of eucalypt here. And koalas get really fussy and only eat about, well, our koalas in Taronga are treated like royalty and get exactly what they want. The wild koalas would end up finding the trees that suit them best. And this is the tiny tip here. This bit here is the bit that they eat. They don't really even munch on the bigger leaves like this. That's just more for dressing and for their comfort. They love the tender tips. And so after this browse is eaten by our koala Thunder today, it will go to other animals in the zoo, like our kangaroos, possums, even giraffe, quite like eucalyptus, and other animals around the zoo. So we're recycling as much as we possibly can to make sure that eucalyptus is also sustainable in Australia. I'm just going to move a little bit and duck around, duck and weave a little bit so that you get another good view of Thunder. I'm trying to come up here where you might be able to see some close-up parts of him. Courtney, can you tell me if that's a clear view?
If you could go a little bit upwards, we're kind of cut off at his neck. That's a good view.
Great. So what I'm hoping you guys are seeing here is some really impressive claws. Being a strictly well, they can come down to the ground, but we would call them arboreal species. Their adaptations for living the trees are pretty obvious. So those massive claws help him to grip and climb as he's ambling amongst the trees. And, I love that lots of people think koalas are cute and cuddly when they're actually quite, if you were to cuddle them, you'd get those claws and they'd go right through your flesh. They're pretty strong, they're pretty sharp. And koalas also have some pretty impressive teeth. So in lots of Australian zoos, it looks cute to be cuddling our koalas, but they're often babies. By the time you get a boy of Thunder's age, he's got impressive claws, impressive teeth, and can certainly give you a nice hickey if you're holding him like a baby on your hip and he doesn't like it anymore. He'll give your shoulder or your neck a nice little bite. And it's not uncommon for Australian zookeepers to have those marks as marks of the trade, if you like. So he also has, and it's, a bit hard to show you exactly, but koalas, being that they sit in tree stumps for hours and hours, and I'm talking 20 hours in the same space, in the same spot if they have a favorite like Thunder does, they have a really rough bottom and a really thick, muscly hide so that they can sit like a giant cushion in the tree stump the whole for hours on end. So their closest living relatives are the wombats in Australia, and wombats have that sort of protection too, but they use it in a slightly different way. Wombats are burrowers, and they bury, and make tunnels underground. But if something like a fox was to follow a wombat into a burrow, they can literally crush the fox's head between their butt and the roof of the tunnel, because their butt's so hard, and they just kind of push upwards against the tunnel roof and crush an animal, or at least certainly injure it, make it think twice about coming into that burrow. So that's how wombats protect themselves, whereas koalas kind of use theirs more as a comfort. Do you guys have any questions about the koala you're seeing, or koalas in general, that I can help you with, or any burning desires? Let me see. Trying to get you a view of his thick fur there. So I can't even reach him at the moment to give him a pat. We do have another koala I might go and visit that I think was lower down on his branch this morning. So I'll go over there and see if we can see. So that's been Thunder. I'll go over and see Baxter if he's being a little bit more amenable to a pat this morning. So like I said, the education area that you're in today is part of our Institute of Science and Learning. And we work with our scientists in really close proximity so that students from kindergarten all the way up to university students like yourselves can experience the science that Taronga is offering. Just bear with me while I fumble with keys, and it's the life of a zookeeper to have many locks, and get the roo yard, which is a great segue into our next animal anyway, the kangaroo yard, ready for you guys to experience. If you've got any questions, put them in the chat so Courtney can help me help you guys ask them. Just want to check in on Baxter the koala first, and then we'll talk about our beautiful kangaroos that you can see here. We'll come back to you girls, okay? We'll come back. No, Baxter's up in his top tree too. So we don't make any of our education animals do anything they don't want to do. So it's very much the animals' welfare that's first in our mind. Oh. Sorry, that's a stiff. See, he's even in a better position. You can see he's right up the top too. This is because it's so early in the morning for us here, and he's not really active all that much. There you go, Baxter. Hi, buddy. Say hello. Any questions about koalas, guys? Or I'll move on to our kangaroos.
Do you guys do any research on them?
On koalas?
Yeah, like how they're very prone to chlamydia and stuff like that. Like I know there's a big research in trying to figure that out.
Yeah, there is, and it's been a problem in Australian koala populations for a long time, unfortunately, chlamydia. And it's a different strain to human chlamydia, which is nice to know. But I must admit the universities over here that are taking part in those discussions see themselves as a bit of, unless they're collaborating with us, often see themselves as competing, as you do in the scientific world, for the resources, grants, that sort of thing, staff even, and expertise. And so I'm not sure where the current research is. And I have a feeling it could be on hold because there's so much going on in Australia just to save koalas, whether they've got chlamydia or not. And chlamydia doesn't kill a koala straight away. It certainly makes them very sick, and we can work on treating them. But we're more, I believe Taronga's putting more effort into habitat restoration We're doing a lot of projects like that. And we have another zoo. We have a sister zoo. Taronga Western Plains Zoo is 5 hours inland from here in a town called Dubbo in New South Wales. And they have a huge koala rehab facility as part of their veterinary service. And they take most of the heavy lifting in terms of koala research for Taronga Zoo and Taronga Conservation Society. Sorry, I'm just looking up at his butt right now. It's hard for me to even tell if you guys are seeing the right thing. There he goes. So he's again, he's in a tricky position. I would have loved to give him a pat for you and a really close-up view of the fur, because it is really, really thick fur. It's waterproof. So eucalyptus leaves give off oil, and obviously rubbing against the leaves all day and eating them gives them an oily kind of surface, and water just beads off them like water off a duck's back. It's just really quite amazing, and it's quite thick. You can poke your fingers into some koalas' fur anyway, up to probably 2 or 3 centimeters deep, depending on the climate, because they can come from Queensland, which is really hot and tropical, up in the very north of the east coast of Australia, down to Victoria, where it's freezing cold. They're adapted to different climate types across that area. So they even can look quite different in size and in colour. It's not unusual.
So somebody asked about the 12 koalas that you had talked about. How did you figure out that they had superior genetics?
So, I mean, I'm not a hardcore scientist, but I know they would have had blood tests and things like that taken when they came in, and we would have had to quarantine them. We kept them separately from our other koalas on site. And I'm sure that part of the research and the reason for collecting those bloods was to check if they're healthy, if they've got any particular genes that we need to know about. And I believe from what I've read amongst my own colleagues is that they discovered that in captive populations, which, just to put it in perspective, there's probably more koalas in zoos in Australia than in the wild. The 12 that we found were not genetically represented across any zoos in Australia. So we had never in the history of that 12 koalas, who all came from geographically the same area in an area we call the Blue Mountains. They were not represented in any captive situations, which means none of their ancestors had ever been pilfered from the wild to become captive koalas over time. We now no longer go to the wild, except in extreme cases like this rescue story. We don't go to the wild and just take koalas to come and be in a zoo anymore, like we may have 100 years ago. All koalas in all zoos in Australia at the moment are captive born. So those 12 koalas were very unique genetically because they simply had no captive heritage. So that made them a really significant population. And we only had them in our care for about 12 weeks. So we're hoping that means we can create a stronger genetic captive population as well. Oh, Baxter, you're a beautiful boy. Okay, I'm going to bring you guys down again now because my arms were getting a bit sore. But let's go out to kangaroos. Unless anyone's got any last koala questions, I'll head out to our kangaroos. So the 2 kangaroos that we have here in this enclosure, we call this the roo yard. And as you can see, it's got a round path around the edge of it. And I can actually bring up to 30 students at a time in here for a lesson. So I might teach kindergarten classes about the needs of living things one day, and then the next day have 30 adults in for a university class. And this quite literally is their lecture theatre. They sit on these rocks. I stand on the grass and have the kangaroos around me. So it's a pretty unique space and I really love working in it. But I'll bring you over to our 2 red kangaroos. So not sure if you guys know about the species variations in kangaroos. She's going to jump away a bit. I'm going to take a seat on a rock for a second. This will be much easier to manage than those koalas who like to get up high. So kangaroos come in many species in Australia, and these are red kangaroos. So you would typically find these guys right in central Australia in the desert. They're well adapted to that sort of lifestyle. And we have Eula, who I'm looking at in the camera now, and Yea is over there in the shade, so a bit harder to see. And they are female red kangaroos. They're both about 4 years old. And in the wild, they'd be breeding by now. So kangaroos, one of their adaptive capacities is to, about 3 years old, they're sexually mature and ready to start breeding. So they breed a lot as well. You might know that they're marsupials, so they have a pouch and their babies are born underdeveloped. We often call them jelly beans, but I'm going to be honest, it's a bit grosser than that. They're jelly beans covered in kind of snot and blood with no arms, no legs, and their eyes are closed. And they are not born into the pouch. I'm sure if you guys have done enough anatomy of some animals, you'll know that marsupials are not born into their pouch, which is a common misconception. They're born from the birth canal, just like all other animals, and then they have to crawl up through up to 30 centimetres worth of fur in a big female red kangaroo, and then they have to find the pouch opening, stumble into that pouch somehow, and find a teat to start suckling from. So it's a bit of a interesting ride for that little baby that's got only a couple of T-Rex style arms at the front, no back legs, no tail yet, and they're blind, and somehow by instinct they know where to go. I've seen in captive kangaroos really like experienced mothers will lick a path, and so there's a bit of a saliva scent trail, I believe, from the birth canal to the opening of the pouch, and that makes it a bit easier for the babies. But lots of first-time kangaroo mums don't know to do that or what that is, and they could quite literally, as the baby's making its way to the pouch, have a scratch on their belly and flick the baby off. They barely know they've given birth because that baby's so small. So it's pretty amazing. The baby grows in the pouch for up to 6 months, and that's when we call them. And another thing, I'm sure being pre-med vet, you all know this, but all marsupial babies, whether they're kangaroos, koalas, possums, wombats, are called joeys. So it's not just kangaroos. We often have to tell people that it's not just kangaroos that are called joeys when they're babies, but the joey will stay with the mum in her pouch for about 6 months. And that's when they get really cute. And the tourists go a bit mental for them because they're all arms and legs flopping out of the pouch opening, and they're really cute. They start coming out to explore on their own, and they're a bit clumsy, and they are getting to explore the world, but they're still suckling from their mothers. So that's not uncommon. But what most people don't know, that's what's happening behind the scenes, is that mum, as soon as the baby kind of hits 6 months old, maybe even 5 or 4, depending on the species, has mated again and has a new baby joey, small like a jelly bean, in her pouch on another nipple, starting to grow and develop. So they are excellent breeders in constant cycle and constant reproduction. And then to add another extra special layer to that as well, they can do something that's called embryonic diapause. You can probably work out what that is from the words, but it means that they can put a bunch of cells, that have only just really been conceived. They can put them, we kind of joke about them putting them in the freezer. They can put them on hold and suspend the development of that bunch of cells for about 18 months if they need to. So in Australia, where we experience such drought, these mums can hold off. If there's no resources like fresh grass or water around, they'll hold off having that bunch of cells develop and grow and be born. So that's embryonic diapause, which means, if she loses the little jelly bean at any stage, she can just turn on the development of the bunch of cells she's got on pause. If her 6-month-old joey gets taken by a dingo, she can just turn on another bunch of cells and be breeding without even having to mate, which is pretty impressive. So they are super mums. I like to think of them as super mums. But that's our beautiful red kangaroos. Does anyone have any questions? Let's see if she'll give me a sniff. Hi, darling girl. Oh, off you go. So we got Gia and Eula, just to put in a bit of context here, just before COVID hit us. So they came into our roo yard. We were starting to get them used to these classes of 30 kids I was telling you about, and then they had a year off. So they're still in the process of learning what it's like to be around humans and getting to know the humans they work with, because even though part of my role is as a zookeeper, primarily I was working from home during COVID, and we only opened again a few months ago. So that's why she's not so keen to come and, you know, snuggle with me right now, but I'm working on it. Courtney, is there any questions about our kangaroos?
I do not see any in the chat right now.
Cool. All right, great. Well, I might move on then and introduce you to another iconic Australian species. Oh, incidentally, I'll see if they'll come close, because I was saying so many kangaroo species exist in Australia. We call them macropods, the macropod family. So red kangaroos, grey kangaroos are probably the common ones that most people think of, but they can come as small as these two little guys here. This is Oliver, and here's a paddy melon, which is in the same family as macropod. You can see they have the same body shape, their feet are the same shape, and they use their tail in the same way as they move. There he goes. And they actually use that tail as another leg almost when they're moving slowly like that, and they don't need to balance. So we have Oliver and Melville, our paddy melons over here. And they kind of show you how small the macropod family can get. And even the girl red kangaroos that you just met across the way, they are small for their age and for their species. The big red male kangaroos are the ones that most people think of, kind of the boxing kangaroo iconic image, because they are really strong. They lean back on their tail and kick with their four limbs and can kill a human being in close contact. So they're pretty impressive. But these little guys are just cute. And they come from the areas, the forest land around eastern New South Wales, along the coast here. All right, let's go and see something a little bit more spiky and sleepy. Just coming out of our kangaroo yard now. Excuse me while I clang with locks and gates. And what I'll do in our next spot is kind of set the tripod up a little bit more statically so that I can talk to you, and I've got a couple of animals that I can show you as well by handling. Get in here a little bit. So we're entering our echidna yard, and echidnas are a pretty, again, iconic Australian species. Lots of people think of them as porcupines or hedgehogs, and what's interesting for most people to learn is that they are no way related to either of those. I'm just going to look around a little bit, excuse me while I shuffle things, because our echidna, we have several echidnas. Here's someone asleep here. I just got to check I'm not stepping on anyone as I go. But we have one under here asleep. So there you go. Sorry, darling girl. So you might not be able to see much, but there's an echidna buried down. I'm probably waking her up and she's going to be grumpy at me. But this is beautiful little Leroy. Whoop, and she, you know, is starting to wake up for her day. It's not unusual for echidnas to sleep in like this. And in a moment, she'll probably get a little bit more active. Now I've given her the buzz. So what I might do is set up the camera and show you guys some of our reptiles. And then if Leroy or her friend Pippa, that I can see kind of just starting to rouse about as well, wake up, I can actually show you them to the camera a little bit more clearly. Let me just set you up and turn the camera around. Okay. So Australia seems to have this reputation for really scary reptiles, especially snakes. So I have one snake and one lizard to show you. I'll start with the lizard because I think this little girl is just beautiful. She's just one of my favourite animals in our zoo. And in Australia, with so many diverse environments that we have, the shingleback lizard, like this little girl, this is Pearl, lives all over the mainland of Australia. And they look very different depending on the climate that they come from and the environment and the resources around them. So Pearl has beautiful blondie scales here, and we call them shinglebacks because they their scales lie across each other like a roof tile, so like a shingle. But they also have lots of other nicknames depending on where they come from in Australia. She's right in the glare there, so that might be better. for you guys to see. And you can also see one of their biggest adaptations is that their tail looks like their head. So they often get called the two-headed lizard, and that tail is a really great decoy for predators who want to typically, like an eagle or a dingo, would typically grab a lizard or a snake and crush its head to disarm it, if you like, and make sure it's not a threat to the predator itself. And so when you're, hovering high above this lizard, as an eagle might, you can't tell which is the head and which to go for. And that gives the lizard at least a little bit more of a chance to get away, to hiss, to bite back, to make a bit of a show of it, and hopefully he'll get a chance to scuttle away. The other thing that our veterinary scientists have discovered in the last 12 or so years, and we didn't used to teach this when I first started at Taronga 15 years ago, but we've learnt that in the desert species of shingleback lizards, their tail acts as an extra water storage and fat storage, a lot like a camel's hump. So in the desert, they've got really fat butts, and we never really knew why. And now we understand that it's a source of ongoing food for them. They can rely on the energy from that fat source. When they may not see water for weeks and weeks and weeks, they can store extra protein and water in their camel's hump. And that's that's probably the better explanation of this adaptation, because a decoy for predators is only going to work 50% of the time. So it's really, we think that that's the most common or the most logical explanation for this head and tail lizard. But like I said, they get so many nicknames because they come from all over Australia. I grew up in Western Australia on the other side of the country, and I called them bobtails over there because of that distinguished tail looking like your head thing. I don't know, I guess it just became the name. But then I came to Sydney and somebody said, oh, you want to meet a shingleback lizard? I'm like, but that's a bobtail. So they have all these names, and the more inland you go, they get called sleepy lizards because they're never very fast. This is like a shingleback at top speed. Even when they're warm, they don't race around too much. But they might be called bog eyes by Indigenous people. They have lots of different names for them. Bidgie Wong's another one. And they all have a different name depending on where they come from. You can see even pinecone lizard is a pretty common name. So they hide pretty well in leaf litter just for that same adaptation. And they can be really dark. So the ones that come here actually from Sydney in our forested areas are a lot darker to attract the heat. Whereas Pearl, we think, has, heritage back in the desert. So she's a lot lighter to reflect the extra heat that she's getting from the sun and from being out in the sun all day. These guys love to eat vegetation. So they'll eat things like dandelion flowers is a big treat for them. And if I don't give Pearl and her boyfriend one at the same time, they fight. So both have to have a dandelion at the same time. But they eat their veggies really well. They also are omnivores, so they love insects. Well, maybe not insects, like they can't keep up with a cockroach or anything like that, but they can definitely munch on a snail and they chomp right through the shell. They've got really strong jaws. So there's a lot of myths in Australia about these guys that when they bite you, a wild one, you go to pick it up and a wild one bites you, that a scar will come and it will reflame up every year. And that's just a bit of an old wives' tale that's come about these lizards, but the injury certainly would pierce skin. They've got really strong teeth kind of within their jawline, within the jawbone under this point. Obviously Pearl's, she's used to being handled and held for education purposes, so she's not worried about doing this at all. And she's the superstar of lots of video conferences like this. They are constantly, like most reptiles, I'm trying to get her so it's not so glary for you guys to get a good view of her. They're constantly poking out their tongues because that's their best sensory organ. So they can smell the world around them much better than they can see. They can feel vibrations in the ground and they can hear. That's her ear there, that little hole on the side of her head there. But definitely her sense of smell via her tongue and the Jacobson's organ on the roof of her mouth are the best sense for her. Does anyone have any questions or interesting comments about the shingleback? She's so shiny.
So this might be a little random.
Go for it.
What color is their tongue?
It's black. So we have a theory, and it's, you know, it's never been tested, but we have a theory that shinglebacks have black tongues for the same reason giraffe have black tongues. When you're constantly poking your tongue out in a sunny environment, it could literally get sunburnt. It's the most fleshiest part of her, you know, without a scaly covering. And if she's constantly flicking her tongue out to explore the world around her, could she get sunburnt? And does dark melanin mean that she doesn't get as much sunburn? That's the theory that most scientists go with at the moment, because we just don't have a better one. And there are pink-tailed lizards here in Australia too, but they only come from cold climates. So we literally have a pink-tongued skink and a blue-tongued skink that we think that because they come from different climates and have different sun exposure, their tongues might be adapted for different purposes. So, you know, we make the joke with the little kids that you wouldn't want to put sun cream on your tongue, so you have to make it dark to cope in that environment. But she's one of my favorites. She's just a beautiful color and a beautiful temperament. But out in the wild, they would hiss at you. The other thing that they can do that's really cool is hiss like a snake. So a lot of people, you know, bushwalking or even gardening, because they're just common amongst our gardens here, would come across one of these guys and be easily mistaking it for a snake. Some of our shinglebacks have been rescued after dangerous accidents with shovels and spades during gardening. So it's not uncommon. Any other comments or questions?
I would say, when you breed them, you had talked about the different colorations between them. Do you guys breed based off of coloration or based off of genetics?
So in Taronga Zoo, so this animal is of least concern. There's no need to, for a conservation reason, breed them. We don't breed them in the zoo, but they are a huge favourite amongst reptile pet keepers here in Australia. So reptile keepers and reptile breeders for the pet industry would be looking at them for colours, and, you know, Pearl would be a huge ticket item on a pet breeder's list because she's so distinctly blonde, which is very different to lots of other shinglebacks, which are quite literally black. I wish now I'd brought her boyfriend out to so you could compare the two of them. She lives with another lizard that they hang out really well, but they would be in the pet circles bred for this colouring. So another male with lighter scales would be really, you know, they would be heavily suggested to pair up and go on a date. So and the other thing that's interesting about this particular, that I think they remind me of pangolins a little bit in the way they look. They've got that beautiful kind of almost scaly covering that reminds me of pangolins. Anyway, that was just me getting off topic. But they breed, when they breed, they don't lay eggs like most reptiles. These guys are live bearers, and they would, you know, a lizard as big as Pearl would have 2 babies at once. So it's the equivalent of a human woman like me giving birth to 7-year-old twins. They're pretty big. She's pretty cumbersome as she's pregnant or gravid. And the male is really devoted. This is an amazing, they've got a love story, these shingleback lizards, because the male will protect her. She'll find a rock or a safe place under a bush or something to be pregnant and to deliver, but he will bring her food as she's getting in her biggest parts of being gravid. So it's pretty amazing that he looks after her. And then after they breed on a yearly cycle. If there's no reason, you know, no accidents or anything to cause them not to come back together, you'll find the same couple of lizards finding their special hiding spot to breed and to be together in a breeding cycle every year. So it's pretty amazing. And when you see a pair of them and one's hit on the road by a car and killed, the second one won't leave until he's really, really sure that she's passed and not going to get up. So they seem to mourn for each other, is the anecdotes we hear on the roads here in Australia. So that's Pearl. I'm going to say goodbye. One last lick. No. So I'll pop her back in her little pet pack here to get one of Australia's most iconic animals out in the reptile world anyway. I mean, I don't know what you guys think. You guys might be a bit more educated than the average animal person, you know, looking into traveling to Australia or something like that. But every time I come across, you know, international tourists without maybe a pre-med vet background, they're going like, oh, all your snakes are deadly and really dangerous. And, you know, we do have the world's most deadly snake here, but I'm certainly not going to be picking it up. So whenever they go, what's that animal? Is it venomous? They've got to be thinking a little bit strangely. So the snake I'm going to show you today is a python. And, oh, he's asleep too. Just to wake him up a little bit. Come on. Excuse my back to you and my butt to you while I get my friend out here. This is Murray, and he is a Murray darling carpet python. So let me put him in a more comfortable spot for both of us. Here we go. So Murray, so the Murray Darling is a river here that separates two Australian states, New South Wales and Victoria. And so these carpet pythons are found straddling that kind of river habitat. And this is a pretty good adult size. Murray's showing us right now a pretty good adult size, so he won't get too much bigger. But people, you know, think of pythons and I think they typically think of the big Burmese pythons, whereas in Australia, Murray is one of our biggest species of pythons. We do get probably scrub pythons up in the very top northern territory of Australia. They get as big as a Burmese python would, and they can eat something like a kangaroo or a wallaby. But this is the common size of python that you'd find in Sydney, down into the central arid areas of Australia. It's not uncommon to find a snake this big. And then it's ironic, but in the same desert areas, we get our tiniest python, which is about this long, maybe 30 to 40 centimeters, and that's the anthill python. So they literally eat ant larvae and are small enough to invade an ant's nest and get in and get insect larvae as their prey. They don't even go for mammals. So it's pretty amazing that we can have that range of snake sizes in the pythons, non-venomous snakes the whole time. So Murray, you can see patterned here. Now the reason they get the name carpet python is, and I don't know what age range you guys are, but I grew up in the 70s where all carpets seemed to have this dodgy old pattern like this. And so these snakes were found in the wild and described in the wild in the 60s when carpet kind of had this splotchy common, you know, our lounge room carpets would have had this sort of look. So carpet python seems to be the name that they've come up with. They interbreed really well with jungle pythons in northern northern Queensland as well. So you can get a jungle carpet hybrid, and they're location specific as well. So you could have a central carpet python, a Murray darling carpet python like Murray here. And incidentally, he's got a girlfriend called Darling. So Murray and Darling, the Murray darling carpet pythons. And they came to us from another zoo, and they're just delightful because they're so placid and just, well, they always love cameras. Murray's a bit of a show pony and he loves flicking his tongue for the camera. So much like the lizard, his sense of smell is one of his best senses, not great at eyesight. And heat sensing as well. He can tell the hot things around him. You might know this about pythons, and I can see if I can show you up close. On his lower jaws, you might see some little holes, kind of where I'm pointing. There you go. They're his heat sensing pits. So he can tell a hot mammal from another cold reptile, and he'll go for the mammal, so that's his food source. Or a bird as well. Birds are common prey for this size animal. So it wouldn't be uncommon for a python this big in Australia to take something down like a kookaburra, or a magpie would be a good treat for these guys. But in many parts of Australia, there are apex predators and really, really important to the environment because they're keeping introduced rats and mice at bay. We have a big problem with rats, mice and rabbits, actually a huge invasive species for Australia. And so we need our big monitor lizards and pythons and other snakes that keep those rodents and pests at bay. Does anyone have any questions? Great. So Murray and Darling have never bred, but if they were to, they would lay eggs. Pythons of this species are egg layers. And we have an echidna awake. So I'll put Murray away shortly while I can and bring you down to ground level in a second. But unless there's any other questions about snake, oh, darling, I want to show you this. This is too cute to ignore. Look at what she's done. Can you see her? She's rolling on her back, waking up, just stretching, just like we would. You are so cute. I'll put Murray away. I mean, I love reptiles and I could talk about them forever, but when an echidna's behaving like this, you've got to capture it. So I'm going to pop him back. Come on. Oh, it's over. He doesn't want to go. He wants to keep talking to you guys. There you go. Okay, let me turn the camera around again for you guys so that you see a better view of what I'm seeing. Okay. This is Leroy. So echidnas are not marsupials like our koala and kangaroo that we met earlier. They are monotremes. And in Australia, monotremes include platypus as well. So the two species of echidna that exist on the planet are our short-beaked echidna here in Australia. And then up in Papua New Guinea, they have a long-beaked echidna too, which kind of looks more like an echidna crossed with a kiwi. Like they have a really funny beak. But the Australian one is like Leroy here, a short-beaked echidna. And then platypus are the other species of monotreme out there. And platypus are the most ancient mammals on the planet. They were around with dinosaurs. So it's pretty amazing to know that, and you know, they're still hanging on there. Unfortunately, in Australia, platypus are under a fair bit of threat due to drought. Their waterways end up becoming a big problem when there's too much drought. But there are echidnas everywhere in Australia, even in Tasmania. And a bit like the shingleback, they look a little bit different depending on where they come from. So in a really cold environment, you would find a lot more darker quills or spikes, and they would have a lot more fur. If I get in nice and close, you can see that there's fur between the quills. And so in a colder environment where it snows even, they would have a lot more quills, fur to quill ratio. And then the guys out in the desert, they'll be a lot more blonder. They'll have these blondie tips all over their body, and they'll have more spikes, because a lot like a elephant's ears and, you know, seal's flippers, they give out heat. They radiate out the extra heat. So they're longer quills as well in the desert. It's not uncommon to find and they're smaller. So in cold environments, being bigger is an advantage. So in the deserts, they're smaller echidnas with really blonde, long spikes. And they look quite different to something that might be living in Tasmania, for example, where it's very snowy. You can see they're quite agile. She can go wherever she wants. They're quite strong. They're all muscles. They're just amazing creatures like that. And she doesn't mind me following her around, but she's just going to keep plodding around and doing her thing, and I'll keep sticking the camera in her face. And the quills, the spikes, are made of keratin, a lot like our hair and fingernails. They're all made of keratin. I often describe them like a dreadlock, but with a blood vessel and a vein running through it. So if I was to actually, you know, get some secateurs or a sharp scissors or something and cut Leroy's spikes, they would bleed because of the blood vessel, and she'd feel it because of the nerve. So occasionally, just like hair, they fall out, and I do find them, you know, amongst the leaf litter as I'm cleaning up after her, or, you know, I go to pat her and they fall out in my fingers just like human hair would. But if you were to pull it, then she'd feel it, just like when we pull our hair and it's not ready to come out. So that's a really interesting fact that lots of people don't know. And unlike porcupines, these guys can't shoot their quills. They're just a purely in-body defense. They don't shoot them out for any reason. And like you saw her earlier, she can bury quite far down, kind of in a shallow kind of little hole, and wedge herself in that hole with only the top spikes on her back here kind of being displayed. So lots of people in Australia don't even realize that these guys could be in their backyard because they're such good hiders. They're very elusive and they're nocturnal as well. So while you do see them out and about in the day because they're looking for ants and termites that are active in the day, they're kind of, we call them crepuscular, active at dusk and dawn. Most animals in Australia, the kangaroos, the koalas and echidnas are all crepuscular. And to beat the heat and then to, because it can get quite cold actually in the desert, it's really, really cold at night time. So they huddle together for warmth, something like a kangaroo would huddle. And then they're most active in that kind of dusk and dawn time of the day. Does anyone have any questions about our echidna here? Or observations, comments? According to my watch, guys, we have 10 or so minutes to go in your session. So if you have any questions, please let me know, or anything you'd like to follow up on. We've been putting them, and I can see some people have joined quite late. We've been putting them in the chat so that Courtney can see them and filter them through to me. Seems to be the way we can do this easiest.
So do you have a favorite animal that you work with or that you have shown us today? Is there one that you prefer over others?
It's, it's hard. It's a bit, I think you're supposed to say you love them all, right? But I do love echidnas, like they're ancient creatures. They've been on our earth for so many years and they're going to outlive us. They're in the battle against climate change. They're actually going to do really well, I think. Platypus, maybe not so much. So it's not a monitoring thing. It's an individual echidna thing, but they're really, really strong. They're great climbers. They're quite brainy and they can solve problems. They work together. We used to have an old office where it kind of had a garden connected to it and we kept our echidnas in there, and we couldn't work out why every morning our bins in the office were all overturned. And then we put a camera in the office and worked out the echidnas, and we had a screen door, so we didn't, and we wouldn't lock it because we didn't think anything too much of locking it. But the echidnas, and there was 4 of them, would climb on top of each other to get into our office, and so they'd tower on top of each other so the top one could undo the door. And then I don't even know how, but they closed it behind them as well. They were smart enough to close it behind them. And all we had was bins all over the floor when we'd get in at 8:30 in the morning. And I don't get it, but they are really tricky, really ingenious. And a lot of people just don't even realize they have them in their backyard in Australia because they hide so well. And they swim. They use their noses like snorkels. It's pretty amazing. Yeah, so they just kind of float and, doggy paddle under the water. And if you YouTube, echidna swimming, you'll see that they go to the beach. They love rivers and ponds and streams, and so when we give them a big bucket of water here, like a kiddie pool full of water, they go mental. It's so cute to see them having such fun in the water. So, yeah, obviously being a zoo and having them captive, we need to think of different ways to enrich them and keep them active and doing all sorts of different stuff. So we often bury things under the ground that they might smell later. Like some of these nice logs that we have in here came to us, when the council around us knocked down a tree and noticed it's full of termites, they might call us to come and collect it. And then we'll bury the whole log in here, maybe a foot down or something, so that they sniff out the termites and come and get them all. So that's them. Leroy, you want to let them see your face a bit closer? Because I don't really see your face. There you go. There you go. There's your big claws. You can see how strong and big those claws are. Hey, girlfriend. Hi. Yeah. So terrible eyesight. They can't see hardly anything. They have really good sense. So their noses as well, their beaks. Platypus have this too. Detect electromagnetism, so they can tell the vibrations and the electricity in an animal more than anything else. So termites and ants and things like that give off that faint little buzz is what they're seeing. You can see her attempts at climbing here as well. They will use any surface to climb up. You can see we've got the perspex on the fence there. That's so they can't get a grip at that height and just get started and go over the edge, because they will. They're little escape artists. Little Houdinis, hey? But yeah, my favourite, I think, amongst the animals you've met today anyway. My favourite in general, so in Australia, to get your zookeeping certificate, every zookeeper has to write a husbandry manual about taking care of a species in captivity. And because no one really cares about them, I chose to do praying mantis in Australia. And so Australian praying mantises are really, really beautiful. The ones that come up from the Queensland rainforests are just gorgeous. So I would say that as a group of animals, praying mantis are my very favourite.
So I believe last I knew there was a good chunk of us that wanted to go into exotic zookeeping, or like not exotic zookeeping, exotic veterinary medicine.
Yep.
Is there anything you would recommend, since you know what somewhat of a zoo schedule is like? Is there anything you would recommend to those who want to go into zookeeping or zoo vet med?
Yeah, be ready for early mornings. I don't know if there's zoos that do it differently in the States, but here in Australia, we open our doors for guests at 9 a.m. So we have to have everything in the zoo ready to go. So, you know, any deliveries, any big renovations we do to an exhibit, all the food has to be prepared and ready to go so that we can open the doors to a fairly ready to go zoo. So it's an early morning. Some of my zookeeping friends start as early as 4 o'clock in the morning and are done by, 10 o'clock, so that they've opened the zoo and their part of the job is done. So it's different for everybody. But I'm an early riser, so I don't mind that so much. And then the other tip, I guess, is any animal experience you can get at Taronga. We tend to want to hire people that have lots of different experience. So even if you've been working in a cat groomer, who wants to groom a cat, a dog groomer or whatever, we find our zookeepers with lots of varied experience, because any animal experience is valuable. And we come from all sorts of backgrounds. I guess traveling as well, like we have lots of people that just come and visit us just to work out what our animals are doing and how they tick, and understanding conservation for Taronga Zoo. And I can't speak for all zoos in Australia, but lots of the big zoos, Australia Zoo, Taronga Zoo, Melbourne, all those kind of zoos, they also have a huge part to play in conservation. It's not just about animals on display, and even their welfare is paramount, and their care in the zoo captive environment is paramount. But if we're not doing something to educate the public or conserve that animal in the wild, then we're kind of only getting half the job done, we believe, here at Taronga. So understanding an animal's status in the wild is important to us as well. So if there's no other questions, guys, we might leave it there. What do you think, Courtney? Are you happy with that? Is any other last questions coming through?
I'll say I have not seen any questions come through.
Okay. Well, if anyone does have any questions that you think of later, or comments or anything like that, Courtney knows how to contact me, because it's kind of ironic that she contacted me through our Zoomobile program, which is a program where we pack all our animals into a van and go out to schools and daycare centres and universities and bring our animals to the client. So we've extended what Zoomobile is now to Zoo video conferencing. So it's a real pleasure to have you guys with us today, this morning. And I know it's towards the end of your day on a Sunday now, but we are just starting our working week now. And it's been great to have you guys.
Thank you so much for making this happen.
No worries. Lots of fun. And look forward to doing it again next time. Thanks, everyone.
So that is it. Thank you guys for coming.